Who is Queer Brown Vegan? Let's discuss. Hi everyone, my name is Isaias Hernandez and I'm the content creator of Queer Brown Vegan. Welcome to my YouTube channel. It's been some time since I've been telling everyone that I've been wanting to expand to vlogging, and it's taken me a few months, but I'm finally here now. Before we get started, go ahead, like, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more eco-educational lifestyle content. For those who are new, Queer Brown Vegan is an educational platform that seeks to provide equitable and accessible forms of environmental educational content through visual graphics, illustrations, and green screen education. My work is deeply centered through an environmental justice lens, advocating for the total liberation of humans and non-human animals. I am an eco-nerd. I gathered some questions from the community asking about me, and I thought I'd share them with you so you get to know me more on a close personal level. Question number one is, can you describe your journey into the environmental space? This is a really personal one for me, and I really enjoyed this question. Is that my journey into environmentalism was the result of pain, grief, anger, and joy, and curiosity. I grew up in LA, most notably the San Fernando Valley region, so A18 represents in cities like Silmar, San Fernando, Pacoima. And throughout my life, I grew up low income, living in Section 8 affordable housing, living off food stamps, and living nearby toxic facilities. Every morning, I would have to wake up at 6 a.m. and take the metro to school, and it was honestly a horrible experience because they had defunded the public school stops in my area due to budget cuts, which forced many of us to rely on the metro. I learned about gardening and recycling, but was a bit embarrassed by the way they taught it to us as a luxury, because most often not, people in that neighborhood didn't even have access to healthy soil or access to recycle. I had to grow up recycling cans in the nearby neighborhood with my mother when I was little, and the recycling economy in Los Angeles is a big issue because many low-income families rely on it as a form of income. And when it came to gardening, I was ashamed of it because my father was a gardener who was heavily exploited in the industry, working for people who did not respect him and having to get paid minimum wage to clean affluent homeowners' homes. And we had to rely a lot on food donations from churches and go to holiday food drives so we can have like holiday themed dinners. And when I look back at it, I get really sad because I didn't know how much my parents sacrificed for my siblings and I during that time. And they really thought the United States was a really great place to raise us. And because of the housing being subsidized, a lot of this infrastructure and the access to clean air and water and soil was so horrible. There was a really poor fumigation, such as like waking up to cockroaches 8 a.m. in the morning, and just knowing the fact that the Public Housing Authority did nothing to address these issues. And I grew up with these conditions, almost normalized to feel that, you know, this is what I'm supposed to live like that. But yeah, I didn't tell any of my peers because I felt so embarrassed that like I had to be living in these conditions. And when I was in middle school, I first learned about the term global warming, and I was curious to explore because educational spaces in the United States are often fragmented. They often fail to provide this interconnected lens of what that means to people. And if you're radical enough, you'd call it climate change. And this was back maybe in 2006. I was like 12 years old. And Nat Geo and Discovery Channel were kind of like the hugest inspirations that got me invested to learn more about the environment, specifically looking to conservation. However, something that in the environmental movement that I did not see was people of color that looked like me, right? Most often not, the shows and the pages and the reading books had blue eyes and white-haired people, which kind of made me relate to environmentalism as a white thing because I was indoctrinated to believe that people of color don't care about the environment because we're poor, we pollute. But even then, as a teenager, I didn't have the right words to express that pain. And in high school, like that curiosity expanded when I had to sell like soda, chips, and snacks to afford my first laptop. And I started doing more research on climate change because that's something that I was really passionate about. And I worked on the weekends with my dad in like cities like Venice, Beverly Hills, Bel Air, and so many snobby towns, cleaning up rich people's homes that like disrespected not only the workers that were undocumented, but my own father and myself too as a child. And so for me, I think like in growing up low income and attending high school and attending conferences and events about climate change, I often felt so confused. And how do you explain environmental injustice when I didn't have the right words? So when I was in high school, I learned about environmental justice, and they talked about that your zip code is actually the highest indicator to tell you how likely are you to like face environmental burdens. And so because of that got me inspired to study environmental science. And so when I went to college when I was 18, I went to UC Berkeley up in Northern California, and it really changed the view of my life and the trajectory of the work I do today. And I was not the smartest in heavy science courses when it came to there, and also the amount of elitism, classism, racism, ableism, all the isms, the phobias that existed that were perpetuated in these institutions. I felt so disgusted being in this institution, and most often not, the classes did not even serve justice, right? It was predominantly white men and white students that often dominated these conversations of what it looks like to be an environmentalist. And so challenging those notions or beliefs was to challenge white supremacy itself. And so I didn't really believe in the way that educational systems in higher ed were designed, because they didn't really include indigenous wisdom, cultural-based experiences, and our own lived experiences. And so this type of erasure made me realize like how many people in the environmental movement are being erased. And why do we have to pay institutions thousands of dollars when they don't even support our own existence? And so I believe that learning about climate justice and environmental justice through an institutional lens was whitewashed. And my experience being an activist in college and working directly with grassroots organizers in the Bay Area taught me the true power of wisdom. Frankly, I believe that indigenous science and Western science can both coexist, but there has been a large power imbalance that has been overlooked in academic spaces. I graduated back in 2018 and was thankful when the academic journey was over, because I felt exploited at the end. It was honestly such a horrible and good experience, but I think that I could have really taught myself much more in outside of the institution than rather placing so much faith in trying to be a quote-unquote perfect environmentalist at UC Berkeley when that didn't even exist. The second question is, when was queerbrownvegan created and why? So I created queerbrownvegan back in November 2019. So it's been nearly 2 years since I created the account, and I was working at a horrible job in New York City. I worked at a creative agency, which I met some amazing people, but I had a horrible boss and manager who exploited me every day. I was not using my environmental science degree and was being invited to do speaking engagements, because before then I had created a project known as Alluvia magazine that focused on environmental narratives. And my best friend Christy actually suggested that I was so passionate to talk about educational topics that why I wasn't creating an account to discuss these issues. And so one day at the airport in New Mexico, we were coming back from a conference, and we're shooting ideas of like queer, vegan, green boy, vegan, and then we said queer, brown, vegan together, and it was 3 words to kind of describe myself: being a queer person of color that's vegan. But during 2020, there was this boom of the infographic popularization, and so I was kind of grouped into an account to becoming popularized because of my infographics. And today the platform has grown to over 100,000 community members who just support my work. And I divested away a bit from infographics because of the amount of digital pollution that exists, and also the amount of content creation that goes into it. The third question is, what are some of your failures? This is honestly really hard to talk about. I failed organic chemistry and calculus in undergrad. I retook both classes and got C's, right? C's get degrees at the end of the day. So I was really horrible at math and science, but I was someone that to push myself. Another thing that I kind of failed in is the other project I was running. It was named Alluvia magazine, which is still online, you can find today, but the issue was the fact of funding, organization, and just trying to work on a project with a lovely person takes so much time and effort into that. And so I really had to kind of slow down. And I guess the other failure that I don't tell a lot of people on here is the ads that I've worked with, right? As an environmentalist, you're held to this highest standard of you're not able to mess up, you're not able to use the wrong language, or you need to be perfect. And a lot of times I've worked with a few companies that may have not had the best environmental missions that they've had, and I own up to that, right? It's not something to be ashamed about, but it's something to kind of just ask yourself, it's not worth the money and ethics for myself, for who I believe in and the communities that are impacted by it. But also I want to kind of point out the fact of how much white folks in the environmental space really constantly criticize Black, Indigenous people of color of like, you worked with this company, you shot a commercial with this exploitative company, you're not able to sell products because you're doing this consumer society. It's like, where do we exist? Where do we breathe in these spaces where it's really hard for us to get funding because we're not an NGO, we're not a corporation, and so as individuals and as content creators, it's really hard to find pathways for funding. And that's something that I'm trying to figure out myself, especially as someone who has a team where it's like I have to fund themselves too because I believe in their work and ethics. And so I really have this like large conversation with myself of like, what is the right thing to do when I know every time I post something online it's going to be criticized. And I think being this imperfect environmentalist is the most realistic form that I can bring myself to others, is like, I'm gonna continue making mistakes and I'll leave those mistakes on as opportunities for me to learn and for others to know that like, you know, I said this that was either problematic, I perpetuate and, you know, like racism, speciesism, and like these are really acts of like, you know, we need to take accountability on ourselves, but we also need to be kinder to ourselves, especially those who are just trying to make a better mission, because if we become more fragmented, like what is the point in achieving environmental liberation? Question number 4 is, are you dating anyone? This one is so iconic because I recently got dumped from my 2-year relationship, and this happened days before I went to the UK for TED Countdown and COP26. Currently focusing on my healing journey and hoping to learn more in my own solo phase, but yeah, make sure to tune in for other videos where I talk more about my experiences at COP26 and TED. Question number 5 is, what are you working on now? This is hard. You know, our society is always demanding us to create and to be scalable. But I believe in localization, which is the act to harmonize our bodies with natural systems to prevent burnout, right? I'm working on a book proposal at the moment, and let's hope I get through this because I'm a horrible writer and it takes me so much time to get through this. Is there other questions you'd like to know about me? Send over questions in the comments below. But thanks again for tuning in, and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more ego content. And thank you so much again for being here.